Greetings, everyone, again. This is Zakes from the FMF, and this week we'll be talking to you about socialism. What is socialism, and why is everyone so obsessed with it, right? People, if you were to talk in, listen to ordinary conversations, you'd hear a lot of people talking about how progressive the ideas of socialism is, right? Well, offhand, you would be told about sharing, equality, and all of these ideals are noble and are things that people should always seek to work towards, right? But what you are more interested in is the actual substance of socialism and what it entails for our economic and legal lives, for lack of a better term. Now, socialism can really be broadly understood as the state's intervention in the economic reality of citizens. Now, there are varied sources and schools of thought within socialism, but for purposes of our discussion, I think socialists would not even disagree with me that one of the fundamental defining features of their system is the state's involvement and the state's intervention into the economic lives of its citizens. Now, with socialism, this is the most important aspect. And I say this because the state is an instrument of violence. The state has the monopoly on violence because it has to use it against those who violate the rights of others and to generally keep law and order, right? Just as any theory and the justification of the violence of the state would profess. But when you tend to use violence in instances where there was no violence perpetuated against another person, this tends to create such horrible, horrible consequences. But most importantly, it is unjust. The principle of it, the principle of being involved in the transactions, for instance, between person A and person B is unjust, irrespective of the fact that your involvement in that transaction will most likely yield the most unpalatable of results, right? I was trying to find the right word besides unpalatable because the consequences of socialism are quite horrible, right? If any one of you viewers are aware of Venezuela, then you would know how horrible those consequences are. If any of you viewers are aware of Maoist China and the Black Book on communism, you would know the 20th century is just littered with graves of human beings who are sitting there because of no other reason but that some other person in a central authority thought that they could run their lives, right? The Holodomor famine comes to mind, which is the most glaring of examples of the consequences of being involved in people's lives. But socialism pretty much is that. So how does the state get involved in people's lives economically? The state will set price floors, price ceilings. In the most extreme of cases, the state will even bar people from owning private property, as it was the case in 20th century communist nations, or as is the case in some aspects in like countries like Cuba and Venezuela. There are certain classes of property that people are not allowed to own. So the state will stop you from transacting freely without their also, watchful guidance and also benevolent guidance, that is. And then they will set things like minimum wage. They will set things like price ceilings. Then a certain product cannot be higher than this particular price. And anyone who's even a little bit acutely aware of economics will know that prices are not determined by politicians in Pretoria or in Cape Town, but rather prices are determined by the forces of, by market forces, the forces of supply and demand. Now socialism manifests itself in various ways, right? In the modern day state is a state that, for a purist like myself, I would say is socialist leaning, and it has most of the problems that people will attribute at the feet of capitalism can actually be traced back to the state. So aspects of this intervention, they depend. They vary from the least interventionist states to the most interventionist state. Socialism is just a standard of intervention, meaning that if a jurisdiction professes to be socialist or is ruled by a socialist party, free trade, things like that are considered anomalies. They are not considered the norm. They are not considered the status quo. The status quo in that jurisdiction is the planning of people's lives, even though they may exist, because it is impossible to have an economy without markets, without commerce, without private property. There is no such thing as economics without those fundamental principles of capitalism. And theoretically, socialism is opposed to this. Socialism posits that private property is bad, people owning businesses privately is bad. And the collective must always own everything, the collective being the state, of course, but methodological individualism tells us that there's no such thing as a collective that acts. So what happens is those individuals who run the state end up being the ones who benefit from all of the collective work of society, whereas in capitalism, we are clear from the get-go that individuals are the ones who act, and as such, individuals are the ones who will, of course, reap the rewards of those actions outside of this fiction of, collective action that is propounded by a lot of socialists. And you see this, of course, in countries that profess or are run by communist or socialist parties. The political leaders, the state leaders, the representatives of the workers, as they would call themselves, tend to live the most lavish of lives, right? There's a saying about how in the USSR, comrades would say that they are tasting the champagne on behalf of the workers, because no person in the USSR could afford to drink champagne, but Bolshevik Party members could do that. Same thing as the current Chinese Communist Party. While during the time of Mao, and now even more so after the reforms of Deng Xiaoping in the 1980s, which converted the Communist Party from being an orthodox communist organization to doing pretty much a mixed economy as they do now, as they call it, socialism with Chinese characteristics. So the main thrust, right, of socialism is that some politician will claim to be acting on your behalf and for your own benefit, and will essentially just run your entire life, plan prices, set price floors, and price ceilings. So that is the main thrust of socialism, right? The idea that an individual other than yourself has the wherewithal and the right to direct your economic life primarily. And they do this under the guise of acting for your own benefit. But as I've just, outlined, every time this has been tried, it has yielded quite horrible consequences. So why? Why is it then that we still have a lot of people, even in South Africa itself, who proudly proclaim to be socialist, even when the results thereof have shown that the ideas do not work? I think that just like everyone else, we all have noble ideals. We all want to see the world as a better place. And as such, this is what makes proponents of socialism so dangerous, because they genuinely believe that the ideas they are propagating in society are ideas that are good. They are doing good. And as such, it becomes much more harder for these people to see the horrors like Holodomor or any other famine that was caused by central planning. What is the solution? Freedom, liberty. This should be easy for everyone watching. We argue for the freedom of the individual to act and plan out their economic lives in a manner that may even be contrary to what a politician in Pretoria or Cape Town may want them to live like. And this is the natural way of life outside of the consequences, which are great, as proven by, studies like the Economic Freedom of the World Index, which show that the more free you are, the more prosperous you are. But beyond those consequences, this is the principle of the matter. As a human being, we are all endowed with natural gifts. And one of the most important of those natural gifts is agency, the ability to own yourself and direct your own life when you are not harming anyone else. Irrespective of your religious inclination, I'm sure you would agree that every human being has the right to dictate their own life. And irrespective of the consequences of them dictating their own lives would yield, it is a just position to have people be free. And that means trade freely without any intervention from someone who professes to know better than them. Now, as always, this was quite lengthier than, our usual videos, but I love talking about socialism, talking about how horrible it is and how wonderful capitalism is. So please tell us your thoughts down in the comments. And as always, stay free.